Welcome to the Soulfull Sound Podcast. This podcast is about celebrating the leaders, teachers, and coaches who guide fellow humans to connect, heal, and discover themselves so they can express their gifts into the world. I am Simone Niles, a coach, sound healer, vocalist, and author. Thank you for being here with me today. Welcome. These are my favorite things to do, bringing these amazing souls on this podcast. I am so honored and excited to be joined by the beautiful LiYana Silver, who is a coach, teacher, and author of Feminine Genius. She helps people move through the hardest challenges in life so they can become who they were always meant to be. Oh, yummy. LiYana, we all need someone like you in our corner, I have to say.
Oh, right. I think it's one of the questions that are reported from people who are on their deathbed, right? Who are looking back and like, did I get to be myself?
Yes.
Myself, yes.
So beautiful. So I have so many beautiful questions that I want to ask you. And one of the things in particular that drew me to you is I had a conversation with one of my girlfriends not long ago, having myself gone through what I would call the dark night of the soul experience. You know, we go through a few of those or many of those in our lives, but this one was pretty beautifully heart-rending and wrenching and all sorts of things. And I navigated through it in the way that I know how. And they were like, well, how did you do that? What's your formula? Because it seems as though you did it with such ease and grace, but that was super hard. And I thought to myself, that's a really interesting question. What is my formula? What is the way that I go through these moments, which I was able to verbalize after the question? When I look at your work, I see that you have so many very practical ways of dealing with these really tough moments in life. So I, for my own personal growth, am really excited to delve in. So before we go into those particular things, tell me a little bit about how you got into this work in the first place, your journey to where you are now.
So I was graced to be born to parents who were, we have the term now, interspiritual, right? Mm-hmm. So they were very much trying. They had the opportunity. We lived close to an interspiritual community center, which is, you know, it's well known in the country. So they had this outlook of trying everything, being open to everything, and sort of weaving a, you know, sacred blanket for yourself that was your connection to life and to the divine. So that was my out of the box, you know, way of being raised. Yes. I had a long career in dance, and then I got very interested in health, holistic health, and the feminine, and partly because as I looked under the covers behind the, you know, in the closets of my life and how it just seemed like this was a something very feared and very oppressed and repressed inside us as people in the larger world and culture. Yes. And I really had to look at myself first and on the ways that I'd mistrusted certain qualities in myself that culture would mark feminine, or they're universal regardless of gender or sex. Yes. But still, right, they are marked as feminine. And so I really delved into that. One of the aspects of, if we can call it the feminine, and one aspect of our humanity is that there is this death and rebirth cycle. And we see it in the natural world, in the seasons. We see it in the phases of the moon. We see it in the menstrual cycle. We see it in certainly, you know, our emotions. But sometimes female bodies who are cycling have a sense of this in the body. We all go through it. It's a little more obvious, right? If you bleed. Yes. Right. And so I noticed that this was one of the really potent things to reclaim of the feminine. Even if you have whatever gendered body you have, that things go up and things go down because we got no skills, no language for going through the death phases of things, going through the times when we have loss and we have grief and are laying fallow and we are really stripping bare of illusions or just who we were before we step into who we are. And so I came across the phrase in a book by a real dear friend of mine who happened to be raised in the same community. And she named it. She named Dark Night of the Soul. And probably like you did, and like everybody does, we hear that and we go, oh, that.
Do you feel called to use your voice and sound in a healing capacity? Learn how to use your voice therapeutically to facilitate healing and well-being. Whether you want to go deeper in your own healing journey or facilitate others in theirs, this training is for you. This online training runs over 5 weekends and offers theory, practice, resources, and support on your path to becoming a qualified sound healer and for your personal healing journey.
So then I had the pleasure of going through one myself, and it's a very shared place. Not every human goes through one or many, but most of us do. And even if we haven't heard the phrase before, when we talk about it afterward, we can recognize that place. We can recognize that transformational space. So I'm sure that I came up with, in my own little room, some of the same distinctions and processes you did. Or we could swap. But certainly that was my initiation. And then I've been, working with people individually as clients. I've done a couple of courses and a series of, I wouldn't call them interviews, but collecting stories of Dark Nights of the Soul. And I have been astounded, by, I would say, we'll get into this if we want to go down there, that there are phases inside of this Dark Night of the Soul. And it's good to know because some things work in one phase that don't work in another. And when we feel that kind of lost and that kind of spiritually lost, to know that there are signposts, or there isn't a map exactly, but there is a shape. There is a labyrinth we're walking. And there are tools that help us go through it with a little more grace.
Yes, well, I definitely want to get into those phases. I love that you said there is not a map, but there is a shape, because I would definitely, having experienced this not that long ago in my life, say that there was nothing to say that this is the right way to go. There was a lot of surrendering to the unknown, but I can definitely sense and feel into the shape of how things were, how I maneuvered through it, how they are now, this side of it. And the obvious of going through and not around that shape. So those phases, yes, let's jump straight in and go into what some of those phases are. And actually, before I do that, because for people listening, we often hear a lot of terms thrown around, the dark night of the soul or this or that. So I just want to go into what are some of those really deep, dark challenges that people might be experiencing, so that the ears perk up before we go into the phases of what they need to think about.
Yes, absolutely. And I will say there's not, a licensure, or there's not an ordaining body that says you do or you do not go through
of course
of the soul, right? You self-diagnose, and
of course.
Right. But obvious ones, are loss of a loved one, a death, a health crisis, losing your job. I would count a global pandemic in there, the political shifts, moving houses, moving countries, divorce, breakup. Sometimes, we say, like, the project that I was working on didn't work. And how could I possibly compare that, right? The death of a dream. How could I possibly compare that to a death of a loved one or a child? And there is no comparing in this realm. There is no comparing. And so I think also transitions from one life stage to another can be.
Oh, for sure.
Right. So in transition, like you wanted to be a mother and you will not be, or you are one, or you are transitioning into menopause, into wisdom years, or something like that. These all count. Some of them can just be really tough transitions. Some of them are dark nights of the soul.
Yes, beautiful. Okay, so let's jump into those phases now.
Yes.
We have a sense of some of those really hard challenges, of course, that people go through, and more importantly, how you help people through them.
Yes. Let me say one thing real quick. It's like the overarching way to hold, I think, really tough times. I think that underlying them, they're painful, they're hard. Nobody wants to go through them, of course. And we feel like, oh, if things have gone so wrong, I must be wrong. I am being punished, right? Because a lot of our belief structures, even if we're trying to change them, we have embedded in us that if things are going wrong in my life, I have done something wrong, or if I've been a good human, good girl, good person, I'll be rewarded. So if I'm not being rewarded, right, I am not good. And so I want to interrogate those assumptions and to say that an attitude toward these times, as hard as they are, that it is not a punishment, but it's an invitation. And I want to be very respectful and careful, because I'm not saying that a diagnosis, like, cheer up,
Of course.
It's all happening for a reason. One of the phases maybe to find the reason. But there's an invitation to, maybe even separate from the loss itself, but an invitation to either, reconnect to what is source or what is soul for you, an invitation to understand yourself better, an invitation to be more, like you said, surrendered or open or listening or in alignment in your life. And so I think that's a helpful frame.
Yes. I mean, it actually, one of the questions that I wanted to ask you, so I will ask it now. We will get to those phases.
Yes, we will.
I will ask you now, because you've kind of opened the door to it, which will lead into what is next. Is often when people are going through the hardest moments, it is difficult to see the light sometimes in those moments. And I know that you speak often in your work about the opportunity in crisis, right? How to mine for gold in these dark moments. So I think you've started to kind of touch on that a little bit. So maybe we share a bit more on that. Yes. And then we can go into the phases when it naturally feels right. So let's just jump in.
Well, in a way, there's the attitude and then the action, right? The attitude that if I'm mining for gold in a dark night of the soul, the attitude is there will be gold in there somewhere.
Yes.
And I'm going to take up my shovel, or I'm going to dig with my hands, or I'm going to do, like you said, the going through, not around. I'm going to do that work for myself and trust that something really precious is in there. Now, people who have gone through a dark night of the soul would give up all the learnings to have that thing back. Sure, right? But also in another way can recognize what I have on this side of it. This gold, this relationship with myself, this connection to the divine, this, humbleness in my humanity was worth that digging. So the way to get to the goal, what action, I think actually depends on which phase you're in. And so maybe that's a good way for us to talk about it.
Great segue. Brilliant. Let's do it.
So I say there's 7 phases, and it's pretty resonant. They don't track exactly, but people know the stages of grief and loss that Elizabeth Kubler-Ross talks about, anger, denial, etc. They're so good, right? And they're like, these are little stations in the process here. So these are a little different, but I also call them phases. And I believe that Elizabeth Kubler-Ross wished she had popularized it as phases rather than stages to recognize that we go in and out. It's not linear.
Yes, exactly.
So the first stage, there's not a whole lot of tools for it, not a whole lot of actions, but it's good to recognize. I call it going down. And there is a sense in that phase, oh, something's not going the way that I thought. And that could be an instant, right? It could be an accident, or it could be, getting a call you wish you didn't get, or it could be gradual. But there is a sense, my reality is shifting. We could even borrow the sense, we're traveling from the overworld into the underworld. Like we get like, well, we're going somewhere.
Yeah.
So often it's just really helpful to know which phase we're in, to name it, to know it's a place, right? This is the part of the shape of this crisis where I am. The second phase, even though it's not linear, I would call, these are a little visceral naming.
Yes.
I call it dismemberment, right? Like really things are flying apart. And one other way to describe it is an acute phase. We're really in it. Could be having the panic attack. We could be, with somebody in that phase. And in an acute phase, the tools are to breathe in and out. Like put one foot in front of the other. This is not what's the silver lining. This is not what's the meaning. This is not, this is like everything then turned upside down. Your body, your mind, your heart, your soul is in a state of dysregulation, right? Yeah. Things are really coming apart. So that's it. Like just breathe in, breathe out. Yeah. That's not, there is a lot of power in even just using the breath to regulate our systems, of course. Taking those deep breaths. The next phase, so the third phase, I would call breathing underwater, which we can't actually do as humans. And so it's a bit of a paradox phase, like I'm in this, but I'm not drowning. It's not totally acute. It's not great. It's not good, but I'm managing. I'm managing. I'm sort of doing the impossible. This is a really good phase, as well as the next couple. First of all, to start, I think it's really helpful to start with self-regulation, self-soothing practices. I do a lot with breathing and simply taking some deep breaths in, maybe pausing at the top, and then slowing your exhale. That's taught here and there. It's so helpful. It tells your body to switch from a dysregulated state to a regulated state, right? You could be, your heart rate could be up, your blood pressure could be up, you could be sweating, you could be shaking. And the breath actually, if you think about crying or even taking in some information, we often take in a deep breath and then, so the terminology is called a parasympathetic reset. It resets something, right? So it can regulate our blood pressure, our pulse, our heart rate, our sweating, our et cetera. And so the body that when it's dysregulated is worried it's going to survive. It feels so in threat. And so just those simple regulating practices like breath can remind us things are not okay, but you're okay.
Yeah. I love that a lot of the exercises for that third phase is breathing exercises for breathing underwater, right?
Right. Yeah. So true.
Amazing. Okay. Great.
So then we get this phase I call listening. And observing, noticing, putting attention, right? We don't want to use the sense of sound, but it's an action of paying attention a bit more. Usually it's not looking, because in a way it sort of feels like a lot of our ability to see and perceive clearly has been taken away. We're really upside down in this phase. So we're kind of using our underused senses or different sensing organs to go like, what's going on here? if this were an invitation, if this was a stripping away, if this was a loving experience that I was in, Simone, if you're okay, I'll pause and talk about where dark night of the soul comes from here.
Yeah, of course.
So dark night of the soul is a phrase that was used, we could say coined, by a Spanish mystic monk named Saint John of the Cross. And he was a student of Teresa of Avila, who was like, you know, in the Christian mystic faith was just this upstart, you know, and just an ecstatic being. So the kind of conventional monks got very angry at this, captured St. John of the Cross, stuck him in this prison, beat him, tortured him, starved him for 9 months, and asked him to betray Teresa of Avila and renounce his faith, and he wouldn't. And in that time, he went through this darkness and questioning, you know, this source or God that he was completely devout and put his faith in, like, where was that source now? If his existence becomes suffering and you know, just the maybe not even existing, just surviving in the body.
Yes.
And he at a certain point had this incredible realization that this was not a separation from soul. This was a really loving process, essentially, to remove all of the usual ways, perhaps, of tasting the sacred that we might have gotten used to, or maybe we've matured into a different way of being, stripping what is no longer true to, you know, to really connect with something that is a deeper level of true, or refined as true. And he had this ecstatic poem come out of him, and it's called, you know, Dark Night of the Soul. And I you know, it's told a little bit differently, but I've heard a telling where what he did was take the rags of his clothes that literally were rotting off his body, figured out how to tie them into a, you know, a rope, threw them out the window and escaped, right? Like the pit of his despair, figured out a way to escape, and he finally got to safety and continued to write this devotional mystic poetry. So that's where it comes from.
That's awesome. I never knew that. That's some great information.
Isn't that fantastic?
I love it.
So I think part of this phase, when we're listening, when we're noticing, when we're observing, when we're getting so curious, what the, you know, expletive is going on here? If this wasn't a punishment, right? That's what he had to go, really had to like go through, because he was being punished. He was being tortured. And, but what is going on here? So then I think there's a phase where I call it the meaning making phase.
This is phase 5.
This is phase 5. You're good counting. Yes.
Good.
Yes, right. Phase 5, meaning making. And I think we begin to start for ourselves to make some meaning. And I think some losses are meaningless or senseless.
Yeah.
So it may not be about the person we lost or the thing that was lost, right? But there is some beauty and intelligence and loving process. There is some meaning in the process for us. Sometimes it's absolutely directly to the loss, right? I mean, maybe we, you know, lost a piece of our health that we certainly grieve, but then it's allowed us to do, you know, something else, right? But I want to be careful here.
Yes.
Going back a little bit, somewhere in these phases, something that I do and take a bit of time with is really start to examine our relationship with pain and with negative emotions.
Yes.
I didn't used to like positive and negative emotions, but I think it's fair, you know, because positive emotions generally have us feel good.
Yes.
And negative emotions, there's pain, right? It doesn't mean that we should avoid them, because, you know, in a lot of ways, that's where some of our problems get entrenched.
Yes.
And so, right, going back to what you said before, which was, this is a process of going through, not around. there's a way to engage with painful experiences or painful emotions.
Yes.
That they're actually messengers. They come with a very clear message for us. And if we can engage them, and we can, not run immediately, but learn how to stay and dialogue. There's a very specific message that anger has,
of course,
that grief has, right?
Yes.
And whenever I do this work with people, and we do this process, and they're like, wow, I don't have to push this away. And it's really given me a piece for what is next for me.
Yes. Yes.
So that, that's one of the tools. That's one of the actions here.
Yeah. And I mean, at the beginning, you spoke about this death and rebirth, right? You used those words. And gosh, I mean, as a mother, I will say one of the most physically painful experiences I've ever had was labor and giving birth to these beautiful souls that are now my children. And so even though we don't always know what we're birthing, the pain is often necessary for it. And we don't think, oh no, I'm hurting, I'm going to have a child, don't hurt. I mean, maybe we wish that in the moment because it's so painful, but we recognize it as a natural part of the process. So I think what you're saying is beautiful. That reframe is pain is necessary. Not in all circumstances, but in a lot of circumstances, it's just a necessary part of the journey. And again, like you, I like the use of the words positive and negative, because that's very different to good and bad. Positive and negative, we need both polarities for things to work in life, right? A battery needs the positive and the negative. We have those polarities, so it's not a good and bad thing, but they feel different in the body.
They really do. And we should acknowledge that, something like fear or anxiety or right, even grief, there's a part of our bodies that think we will die from that. And so it's trying to protect us from that, right?
Yes.
Yes, I think one of the root causes of suffering is that the only tools we've been given is to avoid pain or to push away pain. And if we can learn to listen to pain,
yes,
this is, it opens a doorway, opens a portal.
Yeah,
that we really, right?
Beautiful. Yes. I love that.
Yes. So then I think after meaning making comes a rememberment or a remembering. And certainly I'm not the first person to, say remembering is like remembering, like putting your body back together, right? There was a dismemberment phase, and now there's we're remembering something. We're also putting ourselves back together, putting our psyches back together, putting our bodies, right? We don't call it dark night of the spirit. We call it dark night of the soul. And everybody's going to use those words differently, but for me, like spirit, I can connect to energy. I can connect to, things that don't necessarily land in the body, but the soul exists through the body,
Yes.
So this is a process, right, of like coming home to our bodies, or another experience of being in body, being a divine being in body. And so this phase, right, it's really like reassembling ourselves in that way.
Yes, beautiful.
And then lastly, we get the rising up.
Going down and rising up.
Going down, rising up. Hallelujah.
So much stuff in between, but thank God for the rising up at the end. Yes, amazing.
Right. And we don't know, this could be, it's usually not dark night, usually not a night, but we never know. We know, is this a couple months? Is this a couple years? We don't know. But there is a sense, sometimes it's a clear voice or a clear sign that this is completing. You're on your way up, you're on your way out, right? Or just a sense of like, things look different now. I'm in the same house I was, or same route to work, or whatever it is, but I'm in the overworld now.
Yeah. That is so beautiful. I mean, like I mentioned very early on, I've been through something very recently that as I listen to you, I can recognize them all. Right, which is really
Yes.
beautiful. As I said, my words often in my description when I was talking to my friend who was asking me about it, I spoke a lot about surrendering. I spoke about shattering, which feels like that dismemberment, that kind of just pulling everything apart. I also said it felt like I just had, I don't know, 10 days of complete vomiting everything up. And then it was empty, there was void. And then I had to refill that. So it was a very interesting, as I'm listening to you, I can hear it, but also just to kind of point out what you said at the start, it's not linear and it's phases, because there were points where I thought, all right, I'm rising up. And I was like, oh, no, I'm not. Right. And then, actually, there's something else to be done here. Okay, go back to that pain and ask for more guidance on it. So this is beautiful. I so recognize that. And I love how you framed it. So this is amazing.
Yeah. Oh, good. And I love your words too. Shattering or isn't emptying, right? Sometimes it's going to be a disrobing or like peeling the layers
Yes.
of the onion, but yes, an emptying and then
All out, and
refilling.
then let's refill those cells, because it felt like it was a cellular level for me, for sure. And what I love too that you've pointed out, because I think it's been a thread, is that kind of stripping away what is no longer true was very poignant for me, because I think a lot of the moments that I've had in my life that, not necessarily, I wouldn't call them all dark nights of the soul, but just those very challenging moments, is it's always about coming back to the truth of who I am and recognizing that and going, oh, I didn't even realize that I wasn't aligned with this. There's a moment there for me to kind of come back in, calibrate that and come back into myself. And that definitely was the case for this one. It was going back to me and going into that, letting go of the version even of me that no longer wanted to reside in this new frequency that I've been creating for myself. It's like there's a new frequency, something's got to shift with it. And sometimes that letting go and what feels like loss and what feels like no longer, I suppose congruent on some level, isn't obvious in the conscious mind first. Sometimes it happens in so many different ways that you just go, what the, as you said, And then I was just like, now, drawing for sure, because of my practice and understanding, like you growing up in a very spiritual background, I had a lot of tools. But not a lot of people have a lot of tools. So I actually said to my mom going through this, how do people who don't have the tools and awareness go through these moments? Because it's bloody hard, even for those of us who have them. So
Right?
hard, right?
It's impossible. It isn't impossible because we do it, but it's a little
Of
like
course.
labor
Yeah.
for those of people who have
Yeah.
had labor, or had given birth. There's like, this is not happening, but it
Yeah.
happens. Yeah.
Yes, it does.
Yes.
And I love how practical you laid that out, because for me, anyone listening who's going through anything really hard, and again, as you said, not to diminish or say that their pain is not valid and all of that. In fact, it's just looking at it in a different light, looking at it in a way that they can understand that there's information there. And
Yeah.
those steps, oh, yes, gold, or should I say silver?
Mining for silver.
Yeah. I love that. Okay, so I'm definitely going to strip those 7 phases out and share that with my community, because it's really, really beautiful. So you talk about these 7 phases, and I think this is a really beautiful way to frame it. So I want to look at some of the reasons why sometimes we do feel lost in our lives, because you mentioned sometimes we go into things where like something must be wrong with me, or what's missing, or what did I do wrong, or things like that. So talk about that piece, the piece of, feeling lost in life and things like that.
A nice segue between what you just said and this is, who we were yesterday is not who we are going to be tomorrow. What the tools we needed yesterday are not the tools we need today or tomorrow. What we knew as true, yes, right? So just this is part of that renewal process, right? A death and a rebirth process.
Yes.
I think that one thing that really working with crisis and dark night of the soul in this way has taught me is to really look at things that seem so bad, like being lost, or even going through a loss, and to wonder, to be curious what wisdom is afoot.
Mm.
There's a couple different things that I've noticed that are happening when we can get lost. We feel lost or we feel stuck. These are all like big, beautiful rabbit holes to go down.
Great.
So one of them, I think, is we can get stuck or lost because we are missing half of ourselves. What I mean is that for a lot of us, the tools we've used to get as far as we have, and usually those are, I would call them more masculine tools, even though they are used by all humans, of pushing through, of willpower, of like working hard or really going for it. They work to a certain point, but they required us to put away parts of ourselves, often that are the feminine, often required us to put away part of us that cycles, that goes up and down, that is big or is loud or is feeling or is sensuous or is intuitive, right? And that part's like, that's not the part we get to bring to the table. So we get to a certain point and we're like, the same shit that worked yesterday isn't working today. So I'm gonna try harder. I'm gonna do more of the same, like it worked before. So shouldn't it help to get me where I want to go? And the answer is no. So part of that stuckness is this, I call it a sleeping self, right? It's all the stuff we either put to sleep, or maybe it wasn't conscious at all. We just haven't met those parts of ourselves. Certainly, there are parts of ourselves that have been shamed and, devalued by dominant culture. But it's like that sleeping self is like, hold up.
Yeah.
Trying to wake us up in some way. Like, we just can't get to that next phase of who we are, what we want in our lives without our whole selves. So in a way, the stuckness is a communication from that part of ourselves that is slumbering to wake up, to activate, and to bring to the fore.
Yes, beautiful. So in this case of feminine and masculine, you're referring to the divine feminine or masculine, the way people might describe yin and yang, alpha, omega. Is that what you're referring to? Those energies that we have existing within us that, when they're married, let's say, and they come together in union, they work beautifully together, but sometimes one is more dormant or asleep than the other. And you would say in most cases, the feminine is more dormant. Is that what you, just give me a little bit more on that? Because I know that we have them both. So, talk to me a bit more about that.
Absolutely. So you said it perfectly. I'm not talking about a gender expression.
Sure.
I'm talking about an energy or a quality, and certainly, different tools that we would use. So yes, and every human has them. We might use one or more, but in a culture that prizes linear thinking, logical thinking, getting up, doing the thing, not resting very much, etc., competition, we've all learned to lean a little bit more on what I'm calling masculine energy or divine masculine energy.
Yes.
And in its overuse, it can get to toxic masculine, right?
Yes.
And we live in a culture that has said that certain traits are superior to other traits.
Yes.
And so I'm only drawing the distinction like it's useful to draw the distinction between yin and yang or night and day or something like that.
Yeah, I mean, words, right? Those are words. I completely get it.
Yeah. But this may not be true for everybody, but it's not a big secret that girls and women and anyone who's socialized as female holds a position of less than, right? And then if you add the color of skin or economics into it, you get even less than, right? So there is a value assigned to certain feminine traits and qualities and energy expressions that is less desirable in the world that we live in. And surprise, surprise, that's where our wholeness comes from, or that's where this new set of tools come from that, that get us where we want to go.
Beautiful. So again, just tapping into a little bit more practical things, because you've been so practical with a lot of this, which I love. I love tools. I love resources. I love people to have something and to go away and think about,
Yes.
and to go away and do. Talk about some of those tools. What are some of the tools that allow us to revive or wake up that feminine energy that exists within us all?
Absolutely. So one thing that I notice is almost always the starting place, where whether it's just someone, getting to know me, or if I get a chance to work with them more deeply, is we start with, we just call it your own voice, or your true voice, right? And this is not necessarily that there is sound and vocalization, but there's this sense of an inner knowing, because we all know, and we all know what we know, and we all feel what we feel. We all, at some point, maybe could say what we thought.
Yes.
Know what's right and wrong for us. And that gets so haywire really early on. And so reclaiming this sense of, what is my voice? What do I have to say? What is right for me? What is wrong for me? What's a yes for me? What's a no for me? Is a really powerful place to start, I think.
Yes. Yes.
So it's not right. It can get taken away from us when someone says, don't cry. Or don't get your clothes dirty, right? Like, don't play, don't express yourself. Or, you get, that action is inappropriate for a girl, or inappropriate for a boy, or something, right? We get this, like,
the conditioning,
who I am, conditioning is not okay. And so to reclaim that, I think is really, really powerful. I'll go through it real quickly, but I also have a little exercise that has a home on my website, and it's called Know Your Own Voice, and it'll
amazing
through this.
I'll put links in all of those resources as well for everyone. Amazing. Thank you.
Yes. And what that means is it's a very embodied voice, right? So it's not new for me to say that our bodies have a way of expressing a yes and a way of expressing a no. That is as unique as a fingerprint to each of us. Has a lot of similarities, some beautiful similarities. And the cool thing is that bodies do not lie. Our minds lie sometimes for good reason, but that's not where gaslighting or subterfuge or deceit lives. The body, right? It's not going to always, can't always tell us in clear words. So in a way, this is a process of understanding, how does my voice operate in my body, right? How does my no and my yes feel and sense in this body?
Yeah. That's beautiful.
Yeah.
I mean, I talk about this in my work a lot, and I think it might have been my last podcast that I had that we spoke about that yes and no in the body. And it's so interesting, as you said, there's certain things that are more clear than others. Certainly sometimes there's a maybe, and you're like, okay, I have to kind of sense into this some more. But I think there is this innate knowing that we all have. And I use a very simple example of having a plate of food in front of you. That's the most delicious food, the one that you will always say yes to. And someone says, hey, LiYana, would you like this? And your natural response, exactly as you did it just now, was to lean forward, right? It was to kind of go towards, and there's this openness in the body and this expansion. And often the opposite, putting something that you will absolutely not pass your lips if you had a choice, you'd be like, no thanks. And sometimes it's really subtle. I kind of went no, you kind of came forward with yes, but sometimes it's so subtle, and sometimes it's felt in a way that, other parts of the body get activated in different ways. And I just think it's so beautiful to tap into that. I'm glad that it's coming up more and more with my guests, because I feel like that is a theme that really needs to be covered in a whole podcast episode, that yes and no, and calibrating to that. Because a lot of people, as you talk about that feminine, maybe not fear the word, but often don't go towards the word intuition or intuitive. It's like, no, just use your head on that. Just make a logical decision. Oh, that's not logical. All these terms that we hear. And I just think, good. It's great that it's not logical. There's wisdom in things that are not always the logic and the head and the mind. Let's go to the heart. Let's go to the intuition. And so I love that you're going into that yes and no in the body, because the body's the way in very often, right? It's that way into Ishan, into, someone said this and I don't remember who it is to kind of quote them, but intuition being inner tuition, right?
Wow.
That inner teacher. Intuition. I loved that when I heard it. I was like, whoever said it, I'm not stealing it from you, but I love it. And I think I will be using that because it's so true. The wisdom and the teacher within each and every one of us needs to be expressed.
Well, the first time I started working with this for myself, I mean, this is over 20 years ago. I was studying yoga and I was, on a health journey and definitely starting to listen to my body. And the boyfriend I had at the time was in business, right? And so he was in the other room talking to a business partner about a company that they were going to buy a portion of or buy into. And after they had looked over all the profit and loss statements and, pie charts and graphs and all that stuff, they came in and they just casually, so that boyfriend asked me, what do you think? What does your body think? And actually, I think we'll have a chance to go into this in a second, but he was like, it was more just body, more than body. It was like, what does your yoni think? What does your pussy think?
Yeah, amazing.
So, right, it's body, but be a little more specific. We'll talk about it in a minute. And I was like, well, let me check. So I checked in, right? And I was like, I gotta know. And I don't have a stake in this game, right? I didn't do any of the logical work or the intellectual work to check on the company, but I got to know. And they were like, oh, well, we're doing it anyways. But a couple of weeks later, they found out that the documents were falsified and that the other company had lied. And if the sale had gone through, it would have been the disaster.
Yeah, of course.
And that was the moment I was like,
pussy don't lie.
Pussy don't lie. What in the world was my body and my pussy tapped into that was a different and maybe even more important source of information than the logic? And let's include the logic, let's include the pie charts and the graphs later. Second as a right. So along with you, just bow down to that incredible wisdom or channel of information that our bodies, and I call it the oracle between your thighs.
I love it. Well, go more into that because this is something that I know your work includes so many beautiful things, but talk more about that because it's something that I think is it's not spoken about enough. So really talk to me more about that. Yeah.
So I think a really nice place to do is just the yes and no of the body. And then if we start getting a little more into intuition, which certainly is your yes and your no, and it can be about more complex choices and questions as well. Sure. So an oracle is this idea that comes from the Latin root of the word oracular, right? Or orator, to speak. It means the mouth of God, or the mouth of wisdom, or divine wisdom. So usually, right, in olden times, people would go to a person, or sometimes to a grove of trees or a sacred spot like a spring, but usually a person, right? And they'd be like, should I pray to the east or the west, right? Like, I got this question I'm working on, and you're considered the go-between between humans and divine wisdom here. So seems like a far leap to say that would be in our sexual organs. Bunch of different ways we can talk about this, but one is really fascinating, which is there is a measuring device that measures light and movement in the vagina, right? It's called a vaginal photometer. And it can measure a pulsing that is a distinct pulse from your circulatory system. It's not the pulse of your heart. And it measures, so these pulses in the oracle between your thighs, right in the vagina, that increase in speed and intensity in certain circumstances. when you're a yes for something.
That's beautiful.
When you're feeling confident about something. So it's not necessarily sexual pleasure, right? Feeling confident about something, really drawn towards something. In fact, it isn't measuring sexual response at all. It's measuring more selfhood or confidence, or what is a yes or what is a no. So if we want to include science, we can, and say that there's actually something going on in the wisdom of the female reproductive organs that is very in tune with what brings you into more of yourself. What, if you have a choice, what is the yes?
Yes.
What's the direction of yes? What is the direction of no for yourself? And it doesn't take very long if I'm working with people who have a vagina, right?
Yes.
It doesn't take very long for them to be like, oh, I have noticed that before, or I can notice it now. That's what that was. Oh.
Yeah.
Now we tend to come from lineages that have divorced the sensual and sexual from the spiritual, that say that, this is just for sex or just for procreation. This has nothing to do with a connection to some, to divine guidance.
Yes.
And that's just 5,000 years old. Before that, that wasn't necessarily the way that humans thought about things or practiced things. And in fact, like you said, pussy doesn't lie.
That's right.
Right? Like it's a very clear yes and a very clear no. And just like you can tune into your heart or tune into wherever you felt your yes and you can start to tune in to the oracle between your thighs. It's a little vague, right? Like it could be your vulva. It could be kind of your hara area between your belly button and your pubic bone, something like that. Some people will call it womb space. If you do not have your ovaries, your womb, right? Or if you don't have female reproductive organs, it pretty much still works.
Yes.
But right, so we're just like somewhere in that general area, and there will be a quality of wisdom, of intuitive guidance that we can get from there.
That is beautiful. I mean, this is stuff that I'm aware of, but I don't think I've heard it explained in this particular way before, which I really like. I didn't know about the pulsing and the measurement and things like that. But often in my work in sound and voice, because you spoke about knowing that inner voice, and not necessarily, as you said, vocalizing it, though the work that I do is very much about finding that sound, as you said, that unique sound that's just like we have a unique fingerprint, we have a unique sound print. And I love that. But what I find really interesting in this particular thing, and I mean, we see this a lot. I've seen this on social media posts before for people talking about this, but the throat and the vocal cords and the anatomy in this area, if you look at a diagram of it, it's almost identical to that of a cervix, right? That female genitalia, it's almost identical. We have a lot of things that look exactly the same in that way. And I love that when you see it like that, because for me, that inner voice is connected very much that way. And when you get your yes, let's say when you get the yes from that womb space, the pussy yes, the whatever we want to call it, then speaking that out with confidence and the way you want to express yourself in the world is the most powerful collaboration I think there is. And this is needed more and more and more now than ever for people to stand up, to speak out and really speak what is within them. That is beautiful.
Yes. You said this, but I'll just add to, I believe that the particular quality of tissue, so the kind of mucosal membrane and tissue occurs only two places in the body, right? The throat.
That's right.
And the vaginal canal and the cervix. Yes. And thank goodness for your work. I could use a little more of really like, I got the voice inside, but we also use it with sound or, with our lives too. So.
Yeah. Well, maybe there's a collaboration in future. I mean, this is beautiful. Oh, I could talk to you all day long. I think we'll need to have a part 2 at some point because there's just so much wisdom coming up. I feel like there's so much more to ask you yet, which I haven't yet. But I'll just ask one more question on the voice because you did speak about that. And that is kind of how to sense into it, how to find your own, what is finding your own voice, that inner voice that you're referring to, not necessarily what's audible on the outside, but how do you find that inner voice? Give us a tip or a tool for that.
Absolutely. So the process, which you could do, I'll go slow it down a little bit. If you want to do the exercise, know your voice, but this is the breakdown. So you'll ask yourself a series of questions that you already know the answer is yes. And I'll give a few examples in a moment. But then after you ask yourself the question, you sense for your body's response. Sometimes can help to put your hands on your heart or your belly, right? And then sense for what signals you might get under there.
Yes.
Inside your body, what you might feel in terms of sensations, like expansive or contractive or hot or cold, or emotions like joy or dread, something like that. And where do you feel it? So some examples of yes questions would be, do I love? And then you insert someone or something you love. So you pick whoever, I might pick my son, because I already know the answer is a very clear, it's a hell yes, right?
Yes,
and it's a loving yes. And then I sense, okay, what my body do? What did I see? What did I feel? Sensations, emotions, and where did I feel it? You note that, go on to another question. Do I feel confident when? Now, for you, it might be, do I feel confident when I'm singing, or vocalizing? For LiYana, it might not be the same thing, right? But you pick something where you're like, yeah, I feel myself. I feel I'm doing my thing. Yeah. And so that yes is going to be very connected with your gift, your place. And again, you sense what you feel and where you feel it, and you note that. A subtler one can be, is my name, my example would be, is my name LiYana? And Simone, your example would be, is my name Simone? If someone, you take a spiritual name, you take a name, use whatever you feel like, yes,
this your name.
Is my name, right? That one's a little subtler, can be, right? But this is a yes that is about your identity. This is about your unique fingerprint or voice print. And so then you'll take a moment and go, what's the common denominator? What's the commonality between what I felt and where I felt it? And like you said, in this process, oftentimes there'll be an expansion, it's often in your belly or heart. Sometimes you already feel it in the auricle between your thighs. Regardless, whatever it is. And then you go, that is how my body says yes. You might already know it, but some information might be new. And then you would do the converse, right? For no, you're going to ask yourself similar questions, but you already know the answer is no.
Yes.
Do I love? And then someone that you do, is really challenging.
Yes.
That's what your body, right? It's going to be like, that's a no to like, no, don't want to be around that.
Yeah.
So then you have a sense, right, of, okay, this is the unique fingerprint of how my body says yes and my body says no. And then the way that we start to bring it in, that's we have the building blocks of our voice. And the way that we start to bring it in is give ourselves some low stakes choices and questions, right? What to wear, to go or not go to the event, what to eat if you have a choice. Sometimes those can feel really heavy choices. They do have repercussions, what we wear and what we eat, but they're lower stakes. Right? So we check in, we go like, this outfit or this outfit, where was the yes? And we go for it. And that builds our ability to pose a question, pose a choice to ourselves, really respect our yes or our no, and go in that direction. So that when the moment comes where it's a real high stakes question, do I induce my labor? Do I do a natural birth? Do I leave this relationship? Do I go on this second date? Right? So then you've already built a really nice relationship with that. So there we go.
That's amazing. I love it.
Practical.
Simple, practical, to the point. Everyone can give it a go. And that nuance for me that I always like to mention, and I'm just going to repeat what you said, is not just sensing into the yes or no, but respecting it when it gives you the information, because there is tuning or attuning to your intuition, but there's what are you going to do with the information? And I know in my relationship building, the more I trust it, the more accurate it becomes. Right? The more I listen to the yes, even though it doesn't make sense, the more inaccurate those yeses become. So that respecting that is a really huge and I think very profound part of the equation, let's call it.
Yes. And we'll also say intuition is built, right? It's not just, we all have it, but it's really refined and it's built.
Yes.
And it's really nice when you got some hindsight and after the fact, you look back and then you see how that yes made sense. But in the moment, right, it is a leap of faith. It is trust and really important because it often won't make logical sense. Yes. But it often is dead on. Yes,
that is right. Oh, LiYana, thank you so much for joining me today. I really celebrate you, your much needed work, all the things that you're doing to help people to go through those challenging and, the hardest, really toughest moments of their life. It is such a blessing. It is needed. Thank you for sharing your gifts and all of this amazing, stuff with my wonderful community today. I'm so excited to share this yumminess. And again, I will definitely be in touch and have you on for part 2. I think there's so much more gold and silver to mine from this conversation. Of course, I will put all of your links below this episode, but for anyone listening who might not be able to check those notes out, where can people find you online?
Absolutely. So it's my name, which is LiYana Silver, Silver, like the metal. So LiYanaSilver.com. And it's pretty, if you can hear that auditorily, pretty easy then to find any of the free exercises we've been talking about or join mailing list or whatever from there.
Yeah, and I will pop them all because you've sent me some amazing resources and I think you've spoken so beautifully and practically with tools and stuff like that today that people will just want to grab. So I'm going to put all of those down there. Make sure you go and check out this amazing being. I like to ask all of my guests this final question, LiYana, and that is, what is your soulful sound to the world? A self-prayer or desire that you wish upon the world?
I wish for each one of us to not only have a sense of our true self, but to have a relationship with ourself, with all the different parts of ourself, that inner relationship, that inner environment is respectful, is reverential, is peaceful. I mean, it's not only a gift of a lifetime, but what reverberates from that, what that inspires in the people that we are around from that is profound as well. So I wish that for everyone.
Oh, yes, and so it is. Thank you so much for your love, your presence, your time. We'll see you again soon.
I can't wait. Thank you.
Thanks so much for tuning in. I hope you've enjoyed this episode. Please feel free to share it with your friends and remember to subscribe. From my heart to yours, sending you love, healing, and sound wherever you are.